Good evening and welcome. I'm going to mute everyone all, and then I'm going to unmute myself and come back on. Oh, although it did not mute me. Good evening and welcome. My name is Julie Enzer. I am the editor and publisher of Sinister Wisdom. I'm so pleased to have you this evening at our reading celebrating the launch of Sinister Wisdom 126, Out of Control. Our first thank you is to Carol Kramer and your girlfriend for the opening song, Peace and Harmony. More information about the music is in the chat. I'm so happy to have you here this evening. Before we begin, as is our tradition now, we spend a moment for a land acknowledgement. I'll do it for the land where I am, and I invite people in the chat to put in their land acknowledgement to share with everyone. We are all around the United States and around the world, many of us living on occupied, unceded land. I am in what is now Dover, Florida, the traditional homelands and territories of the Seminole. We pause for a moment to recognize the histories of war and colonization that shape our lives, and to imagine and work for a world where we have a fair and equitable distribution of resources. We have a full hour planned for you, with plans to wrap up around 9 p.m. on the East Coast, including time for our traditional dance number at the end. If you're not familiar with Sinister Wisdom, welcome, and I invite you to learn more about us. Sinister Wisdom is a quarterly journal of lesbian literature and art, and increasingly we're doing other things to culturally engage lesbian communities. If you're not currently a subscriber, I encourage you to sign up for a subscription today by going to sinisterwisdom.org/subscribe. If you're able, a group of monthly sustainers are vital to Sinister Wisdom. These are women who give $3, $5, or even $100 a month to support the journal. You can sign up as a sustainer at sinisterwisdom.org/sustainers. I send out emails every month when your gift arrives with behind-the-scene details and new information about what we have coming in the journal. Now, I do want to note here, for those of you who are current subscribers, that our renewal letters with Sinister Wisdom 126 were a little screwed up. I actually said completely screwed up when I wrote the script, but it's only a little bit. There were about 200 of the women who are subscribers who got a renewal notice that was not accurate. The Mail House and I are working on communicating with those folks to let them know that they are not up for renewal. So if it seems like your subscription should be up for renewal, please renew today. But if it seems like it shouldn't be, you can disregard the renewal letter or email me directly and I can let you know when your subscription is up for renewal. I appreciate the many ways lesbians lift up and support the work of Sinister Wisdom. As is our tradition, we launch our fall fundraising campaign in November. I hope if you believe in and support the work of Sinister Wisdom that you'll consider making a donation if you are able to. It means a lot to all of us. A few housekeeping notes before we begin the program. First, as I muted everyone, please keep your microphone muted throughout the program. If we see you making noise, we will mute you. And there will be an opportunity to unmute, wave, and cheer at the end of our program for this evening. Feel free to light up the chat on Zoom and if you're watching, you can also put comments on our Facebook page and talk with people that way. Readers love checking out the chat when they are done reading, and we'll download and share the chat transcript. You can also talk individually to people in private chats. As the program proceeds, if you want to show appreciation for readers, please wave your hand at the end of each reading. And you can also use the reaction emojis on Zoom. Feel free to test those now. If you need technical assistance this evening, you can chat with Max Bacher or Sierra E. Both of them are on tap for technical assistance this evening. I also just enabled the live transcript, so you should be able to now see the live transcript for this event. I apologize, I forgot that at the beginning. We are recording the event this evening. It will be available starting tomorrow or Thursday at sinisterwisdom.org/SW126. And the issue is in the mail. I know many people have received it. I've gotten lots of great feedback. If you're subscribed and your copy doesn't arrive by October 31st, send me an email and I'll get you a replacement quickly. Now on to our program. Sinister Wisdom 126, Out of Control, is a wonderful and special issue of the journal. This evening, we're having conversations about and readings from the issue. Personally, this issue and the work that's behind it inspires me on a regular basis. Solidarity with women inside, particularly women who are political prisoners, is to me a type of holy work, and I have the greatest appreciation for women who have done this work and for women who are inside. I want to start by thanking and inviting the two co-editors of this issue, Brooke Lober and Jane Segal, to join me, and invite everyone to begin by waving and thanking them for their work to make this incredible issue happen. Sierra, if you would pin both Jane and Brooke. I see Jane, so I will pin her, and I'll look for Brooke here. And there's Brooke. Let's see. I've added Brooke as a pin. Excellent. So thank you both for all of your work on this issue. It's really wonderful. As I said, I've been getting great letters and appreciations about it. I'm so grateful for the work that you two did on it. First, Jane, would you start out by telling us why a special issue on Out of Control? What prompted it and what inspired you to do this work with us?
Well, what I feel is that almost 36 years ago, actually, in response to the Bureau of Prisons opening up this horrible subterranean behavior mod unit, specifically for women political prisoners and Puerto Rican prisoners of war. The story isn't here. People will, I know most, I don't know that all of you have seen it, but our story starting there is in our Sinister Wisdom magazine 126. 4 women, Judith Merkinson, Jay Mullins, myself, and Bo Brown, started an organization which was called the Committee to shut down Lexington Control Unit, later to become Out of Control. We grew and our work grew, and we were very relevant and extremely urgent. The issue at the time was extremely urgent. The story unfolds, as I said, in our magazine. Now, today, fast forward these 36 years ago, 36 years now, gender violence has grown outside and inside, as we know, as activists, as women. Absolutely. The mass incarceration of people of color has grown enormously. So I would venture to say, of course, we all agree that this is very relevant and very serious and, very urgent issue now, as well as it was way before. So that is a primary reason why. The other reason that I feel is that photos, graphics, artwork, the stories, what we have tried to do is create a collage that is incorporating different political prisoners' voices, activist voices, et cetera, and their own graphics and their own photos to help create a picture of our past, because I do believe, and we believe, that it's through understanding the past that we can inform and shape our present and our future activism and our future movement. And that's a real reason why, is to examine the history, our herstory, excuse me, right? Examine our history in order to move forward and understand our present and the future. And that's what I have to say.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
And Brooke, would you talk first, Brooke, I think people would love to hear a little bit of your story of how you met Jane and got your story of getting involved in this. And also, can you talk a little bit about how and why this is particularly relevant to lesbians.
Sure, thank you. So the way that I met the members of Out of Control, the way that I met Jane and members of Out of Control is, well, I was looking in the Freedom Archives. I was actually looking for evidence of past histories of feminist action on Palestine solidarity. And I found a really beautiful pamphlet made by the group Women Against Imperialism. It's called The Issue of Zionism in the Women's Movement. And I have some thanks to say, but definitely want to thank Claude and Nathaniel and the Freedom Archives for all the contributions that you made to this work. So I think it was Claude who told me, well, if you're interested in this, maybe you should talk to these people, and started to make some introductions. So I met a couple members of the group Women Against Imperialism, and I believe it was Jennifer Beach, who is interviewed in the magazine or in the journal, who said, you know, the group I really think you need to interview is Out of Control. And so it was kind of by connections like that. And, you know, I think that I was really excited to find Bay Area history. I'm from this area. I'm from the, well, given the land acknowledgement, I'll say that I'm from the Amamutsan area of California, which is now known as Santa Cruz, obviously named in the Mission era. And the activism and the movements that have existed here are really important to me, really because of what Jane said, using these materials in the past actually to inspire work in the present and the future. So that's a little bit about how I met the members of Out of Control. And I think that because Jane had done so much work, you know, Jane really welcomed this project. And if Jane and I weren't working together, the project wouldn't have been able to be what it was. I mean, the co-editing actually worked because Jane was a member of this organization. I know that you had asked me to comment on the meaning of this work and this history, this past for lesbian politics. And I think that for me, this is a very important intervention to make in what we think about as lesbian politics today. I will say that someone whose work was inspiring to me before and during the creation of this was the work of Susan Rosenberg. Susan Rosenberg is featured in this journal, and she was a political prisoner who was incarcerated in the Lexington Control Unit that inspired, right, the name Out of Control. And one of the things that I think was so really moving was reading Rosenberg's autobiography, her memoir, An American Radical, and understanding her trajectory toward radical politics. One of the things that she talks about there is being a young person growing up in New York City, and that one of her best friends was in really serious drug addiction, was addicted to heroin, and that inspired her to do community-based work on behalf of people who use drugs. In that community-based work, she worked in a clinic. She worked in a health clinic that was run by Dr. Mutulu Shakur. And Dr. Mutulu Shakur created an acupuncture treatment program to ameliorate some of the effects of physical dependence on heroin. You know, Mutulu Shakur was part of the Black Liberation Movement, and Susan Rosenberg joined the Black Liberation Movement out of that sense of solidarity that wasn't only about another person, but actually came from the ground of her own life. I think that it was looking at other people like Susan Rosenberg, right? Other people who are featured here, Laura Whitehorn, Linda Evans, who provided this example of what solidarity could be. And I was curious to understand what that would mean for lesbian politics in an era where we're looking at all kinds of mainstreaming of lesbian politics, and actually a kind of inclusive relationship with the state has been, right, the politics of many liberal movements. And this work shows something different. It shows a critical relationship with the state. It shows an attention to state violence. And it really provides us with some of the prehistory, I think, of what we call the abolition movement now. So Emily Thuma, another scholar whose work came out during this time, has called this anti-carceral feminism. So really taking those interests of feminist and lesbian communities in gender justice, right, in nonconformity, in not complying with some of the gender demands and heterosexual demands of dominant culture, and actually extending that out to have solidarity with others who are criminalized and controlled by the state. So I just want to mention that Jane, among others, were actually present at the first Critical Resistance Conference, and Out of Control's workshop there was one of the few places, I think, where people who were incarcerated were able to speak at that really important outset of the contemporary abolition movement. And it was just exposing and exploring all those roots that was so meaningful to me in doing this project.
That's great. I want to invite you each to share some reflections on what the journey was to editing this book. I know, like, our readers encounter it as a completed project, all bound and beautiful and arriving in their mail. And I just love to have editors talk a little bit about some of the joys and the challenges of making issues happen.
Very hard. I had never worked on a magazine before, and I took on, the graphics, and I took on doing the graphics, the art, the photos, that part of it. And for me, that was my responsibility part of it, and Brooke did more of the editing part. Brooke did the editing part of it, although I did edit a little bit, just one or two things. And it was very hard for me. I was trying to get a sense of our work by telling our history in images. And yes, I have done that in my life before, but not like this, and not looking at my own life. So it was an intense experience for me. I spent hours taking my life off the shelf, from under the bed, from out of a box. I was unpacking my younger self, I called it. That was quite a trip. A long time ago, I was a lot younger. Searching for images, I borrowed, so many people. I made a list. How many people I borrowed images from: Atang, Susan Goldberg, Ona, Tanya, Gemma, Penny, Dulcia, Frankie, Linda Evans, Laura Whitehorn, Kay, a number, the Puerto Rican Cultural Center Archives, Freedom Archives, a lot of people. Did I say Zoma? Yes. And that was a lot of work. And then it was intense looking at all those years. And so it was an emotional experience. I found it very interesting. I liked doing it, but I also found it very hard. Yes. And I have to say, I found it also very emotional because of loss, and not just the loss of my youth, but the loss of my youth was there for me. Because when I saw these pictures of me, I went, that can't be me. That was like 36 years ago. Oh my goodness. And the loss of two people, Mo Cowman and Bo Brown, who we dedicated the issue to. And I worked with both of them for a very long time. And I did work some with people who had been in and out of control at the time when we were doing this, but they were gone, and I couldn't talk to them about any of it. And that was a very hard thing for me. And I have to do a big shout out, and I say this, I did not do this alone. A big shout out to Lisa Roth, who did the cover on this and did endless number of hours of work on antique photos, folks. I mean, antique photos. If you look at the years that a lot of those photos were taken a long time ago, to make them work. And she was very successful in that. Also, to Dulcia Pagan, you need to look at the back of the issue. This is Dulcia's painting here, a permanent fabric paint, and artfully enhanced by Linda Evans' stitches, her fiber art on top of it. And I really wanted it to be the whole back cover, but it couldn't be because of the dimensions, something I never understood, but it couldn't be. And that's okay, that I didn't understand it. Jennifer Beach, who helped me figure out how to do the curating with, you know, a monitor. I went and bought it. She told me to get a monitor. I couldn't do it just with my laptop. And she helped me understand how to do all of that with Claude Marks and Freedom Archives, who served, as Brooke already mentioned, a resource for photos and graphics and as well as information. Also, they did a lot of scanning for me, which then went to Lisa. We had a whole thing set up and it worked. And also Jane Mullins, who I talked about. I talked it over with her quite a bit. So I wasn't alone, and that was why it worked. And I really loved doing it, but it was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. So
I'll confess to everyone that the first round of pages that we got from the and I didn't know this whole story, Jane, when we were working on it, of how much you had curated these images and how much work went into it. I mean, like, I know a lot of work goes into it, but it's very moving hearing this, because the first round of pages that we got were kind of a mess, right, from the perspective of the art program. And I think of you, all of your diplomatic emails of like, maybe we could move these around and make this bigger or do that. And I think the place that we got to was is really excellent. But I know that the first round was a challenge. And for me, it's like, oh, you know, well, we'll fix it as we go along. But I know it feels differently when you're in a different, when you've put the pieces together. Brooke, do you want to talk a little bit about editing?
Sure. I mean, everything that Jane said was always on my mind. And I think that being a witness to Jane's experience of memory and also experiencing loss was really at the forefront for me from time to time. So I think that it was definitely an emotional experience. And there was, I guess, in a way, there's another layer, because as a younger activist, you know, I'm middle age, and my daughter witnessed me doing this project. And I think that for me, being in relationship with the next generation, the generation of activists that came before us, and trying to understand from their perspective some of the complexities of the work, the change over time that we feel when we do advocacy, and then we reflect on it later. And also, I feel thankful that the people who contributed to this work, Jane among others, also wanted me to be well and had concerns about me. And Jane and I spent a lot of time just talking about our personal lives. And I felt like I gained someone who wanted to advise and hold me in certain ways. And that really meant a lot to me during this process. So it was anything but objective. I'm not just some objective historian. This was totally about creating relationships with people and with a past that I really care about. So I guess I can say that. I also, you know, from time to time was able to bring this work into my classrooms. I've been teaching mostly at Sonoma State and California College of the Arts, and now at UC Berkeley in different feminist studies and gender women studies and queer studies classrooms. And I was really aware from the beginning of this project that young people wanted it, that they want to see it, they wanted to understand it, and I wanted to do the work of translating it for them so that it would make sense to people who are here now. Like, why would a bunch of lesbians go and do work for political prisoners? And I felt like I needed to construct that bridge. And I was lucky also to work with some interns here at UC Berkeley, Rika Fromm and Habiba Radwan, among others, who actually wanted to dive into this material, wanted to understand the messages, the feminist and queer messages, and also the anti-imperialist and anti-carceral messages of this work. So I always was excited about it. And I think I was a little bit of a cheerleader for the project all along.
That's great. Brooke, do you want to read a little bit from the notes for a magazine?
Yeah, so I'm just going to read from the very beginning of the introduction. And, you know, it starts on page 21.
She wrote this.
The volume that you hold in your hands is priceless. It is a record of the imaginative creations, aspirations, relations, and life histories of the radical lesbian ancestors of our dreams, the organization Out of Control, Lesbian Committee to support women political prisoners. In the late 20th century, an era of foreign wars, the rapid growth of the prison industrial complex, and increasingly alienated consumer culture and technology, this group of self-proclaimed dykes from hell convened, bonded, and strengthened. Toward one another, they softened and became steadfast, creating profound friendships and partnerships that formed the building blocks for living their politics in the real world. The members of Out of Control shared a radical stance from which they lived their lives as lesbian, anti-racist, feminist abolitionists dedicated to the support of their incarcerated comrades. From their early days growing up in liberal or conservative homes, most of them radicalized in their teens and 20s, some influenced by the culture of the Jewish left they witnessed in their home communities, this small and remarkable group of women united to support the movements that first inspired them: opposition to the Vietnam War, Black liberation, internationalism, anti-colonialism, and Indigenous sovereignty. As their decades in these movements became the fabric of their lives, they would soon spend many years largely focused on their close friends and comrades who had been incarcerated for acts of armed resistance, held on disproportionate charges for being too radical, and in the worst cases, subjected to torture, abuse, and many violations of civil and human rights. Out of Control fought back. In advocating publicly for their radical sisters inside, from the 1980s into the 2000s, Out of Control embodied an important nexus of several social movements: the prison movement of the late 20th century, the emerging movement for the abolition of the prison industrial complex of the early 2000s, the gay liberation movement, queer and trans culture and politics, and leftist internationalism. I'll stop it there. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Brooke. And Jane, I think you're going to read from a part of your interview that's in the volume. Would you go
That's
ahead?
right. Yes, I will. Out of Control was really my political work for a very long time. My deep involvement with Out of Control led me to participate in a lot of activities and a lot of campaigns for women political prisoners and Puerto Rican prisoners of war. But we didn't come to it just because of the Lexington High Security Unit. I mean, yes, we came to it in response to the opening of Lexington, the high security, subterranean, small group isolation, experimental control unit for women political prisoners and one prisoner of war. Earlier on, there was a high security unit for women within FCI Alderson, West Virginia. Bo was there, and so was Assata Shakur. Both of these units were explicitly political, but they were locking up women political prisoners and Puerto Rican POWs. But the control unit at Lexington was more specific, very brutal and very horrible. I visited Sylvia at Lexington, and it was intense. I came to Out of Control with a lot of political organizing behind me, and Bo did too, and Merck did too, and Jay did too. So I would say the four of us who founded Out of Control had the politics of the time, of the late 60s and the 70s. We formed the group in '87, but we were formed earlier on. Bo and I are the same age. Merck and Jay are a little younger. Our first action was a demo against the Lexington Control Unit in January of '87, and we kept going. By '98, it was the Critical Resistance Conference. We were involved in the organizing of Critical Resistance. Bo and I were on the organizing committee for the conference. So that's about 11 years ago. And during that time, we were doing a lot of educational work and agitation. First around Lexington, and then when Lexington closed, we were doing work around women political prisoners and Puerto Rican women prisoners of war. Our focus was the women political prisoners and prisoners of war. There were so many of them. We needed to make sure they weren't forgotten. We wanted the women to be visible.
Thank you both so much. Good. Jane and Brooke will be back with us nearer to the end of the program. Now we're going to hear from Dilcia Pagan, who's coming to us from Puerto Rico. Dilcia, I'm going to pin you right now. And have you introduce yourself and talk and read and talk a little bit about your contributions to the book. Welcome. And you're muted.
Yes. Hi, saludos, greetings. Hi, I'm Dilcia Pagan. I live in Loiza, Puerto Rico. I'm a former Puerto Rican political prisoner of war. And I'm honored to say that I made a choice to be a member of the FALN, Armed Forces for National Liberation. What can I say? I was born in Lincoln Hospital, raised in El Barrio, East Harlem. I went to Catholic schools because there was no public school would take me. I was raised by two incredible people. My mother was this unbelievably advanced feminist, I believe, really in her own way. My father was a plumber, but a nationalist. So I learned about Don Pedro Campo when I was this little. My father would sit me in his lap, and he used to have all his speeches, and he would read them to me. He always told me that Don Pedro was the most important person in my life because he fought for the freedom of our country. My mother always told me that, no matter where you are, you're Puerto Rican, and you always have to be proud of that. And I was taught very early that my life in El Barrio was about making it a better place for people to live. I was an organizer at 18. I was a child performer on the Children's Hour, if anybody remembers the Argyle show. I was the child with Maribel the talking dog. So I did live television from I was 5.5 till 12 years old. I lived in El Barrio. It didn't make me any better than anybody else. So my parents always told me. I went to every Puerto Rican club, social club, because that's how people interacted in those days. I sang songs from Broadway plays and TV shows, and a couple who used to do Puerto Rican dancing would perform. And then I went to, I was involved in the anti-poverty program, but when we thought we were going to create real change. So I became an organizer in education, in health, and in housing. And that's where I saw the real contradiction of society. It was like, wow, here is East Harlem. I'm privileged because I'm an only child. And I looked at the neighborhood and how do you get people to believe in themselves? How do you make people have their own right to create their future and to create change? And that's how I found out the falseness of the anti-poverty program, because I became an evaluator for the city of New York, worked with this incredible man, Joseph Holdamp, and we created how does one evaluate self-help? Well, we use tools from social working, and what we found out, to make a long story short, is that the poverty programs, all they did was create it's just like colonialism. It made people be dependent on the system. They weren't creating leadership. They were creating people that were images of themselves. At the same time, the Puerto Rican independence movement was very active in New York. It was the struggle of Culebra. My father passed away when I was 15, but we were always involved in the demonstrations for Culebra, my mother and I. Then we got involved in all the community involvement of better education, bilingual education. I became a teacher. I went to Brooklyn College, and I was going to do it like in and out, and all of a sudden I was stopped in the yard in front of the president's office and said, "You Dilcia Pagan?" I said, "Yeah." "Right, you're an organizer?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, the Black students want to have a meeting with you." And that's where we organized a takeover to establish the Black Students Studies Department. Then I kind of figured, where are the Puerto Ricans? Oh, the Puerto Ricans are upstairs on the 8th floor dancing. So I organized the Puerto Ricans. And it's sad that last year they came out with a documentary called How to Make the Impossible Possible. I'm not even in it. And I believe it's because of my politics, but that's okay. I've talked to the guys who did it, and I refused to go to their, and they had a big gala event. And I said, you don't need me there. You know, I know what I created. Then I got involved with the students all over the city of New York. The young lords were involved in East Harlem. I used to go to City College from Brooklyn College. And one night we were all sitting in a room and we said, you know, we all have the same problems. So we founded the Puerto Rican Student Union. There's a booklet at Hunter College Archives that says, Somos Boricuas y estamos despertando. We are Puerto Ricans and we're becoming aware. We are awakening. That was written by Hilda Marotis, myself, and Carlos Aponte. Carlos then became a young lord. I became a supporter of the young lords because I really felt that they needed someone who had my background and community. I lived on 110th Street. My mother passed away when I was 20. So then I had my own apartment, and when the People's Church happened, well, my apartment became the Office of Communications, and Mickey Melendez just sent me a note, big bottles here. So I became like the godmother of the young lords of the Puerto Rican Student Union. And the truth of the matter, we were all almost the same age, but I used to hang out with the older guys and women in East Harlem. So to me, they were like, oh, the little kids. Mickey Melendez tells everyone, oh, Dulce used to cross me the street so the bus would hit me. And we're only 2 years apart. Long story short is that doing all this interactive work, what I began to see, and I saw in reading, I knew about what was happening in third world countries in the Vietnam War. And then I read, Nieves Falcon I brought Nieves Falcon, Dr. Luis Nieves Falcon from Puerto Rico to teach at Brooklyn College. Nieves was like an international sociologist, but his first course was learning about colonialization. And he requested that I read Black Skin's White Mask. And I wrote my thesis. Nieves became our lawyer who coordinated the national campaign for our release. And he became a lawyer because that's what he wanted to do, was work and get us out of prison. So I never knew what he graded me until I was in prison. But Nieves Falcon was like the most intelligent human being who created sociology as to this incredible phenomena of what society should be about. Let's see what happens after that. I became a TV producer. Why? Because I joined, we had a group in East Harlem called the Puerto Rican Media Education Council. And we realized that there were no positive images of Puerto Ricans on television. All it was is the violence of the news or the junkie that stole the pot, you know. Of course, one of the plays by Papoleto Melendez. Anyway, we had a meeting. We filed Jose Rivera, not the assemblyman, other Jose Rivera Montova. He became our lawyer. We sued all the networks, and we found out they didn't want to really deal with the issue. So we had a meeting, or the former incredible artist, Jorge Soto, said, you know, AD, so people didn't call me Dulce, they call me D. There's going to be a telethon. I said, well, you guys want to take it over? And what we did was, our group was activists, gay, lesbians, you name it, all Puerto Ricans, writers, artists, the Taller Boricua, people from there. We had people from all the 5 boroughs, and we had 300 people marching from the WNET. I was the only woman that went in with Piri Thomas, Jose Rivera, the former assemblyman, Humberto Cintrón, Frank Espada. Who else? It's funny, the number 11 is a very powerful number for me. We walked in, we took over the telethon, and what's his name? Whatever his name was, the president of WNET didn't know what to do. So we got funded, and the first television series, I became the first Puerto Rican woman producer of television at relevancy to Puerto Ricans in New York City. From then I went to work to ABC, and I went to work for WGBH in Boston, also for NET. I've worked for all the networks, but I can honestly say that everything I did had to do about our struggle and what was happening, not just in the diaspora, which is now the new word. We never used that in the 60s and 70s, but what's happening in Puerto Rico. My last program on CBS was on the FALN. Isn't that incredible? After that, William Morales was my compañero. I was subpoenaed to the grand jury, and I refused to testify. And he escaped from Bellevue Hospital. I was once again subpoenaed to the grand jury. My son was 3.5 months. And I got a call to put together the press conference because our 5 Puerto Rican nationalists were being released. So I had already planned to go underground. 3 days after I received Rafael, Lolita, Irving, and Oscar Collazo, I went underground. My son was 5 months old. There was a point in life when William was arrested on Antonio Corregel. He not just was a national poet laureate, he was a Puerto Rican revolutionary socialist who first came to support William. I told him, Juan, if ever I get arrested, I don't want my son to be raised in New York or in Puerto Rico. You have to find a place for him to survive. And my son was raised in Chihuahua, Mexico, by an incredible Mexican socialist family, which they were just here. I have 2 granddaughters. My son is 43 years old. His wife is one of the activists with Tito Kayak in Vieques. She did 3 months. She's an attorney now. Now she's doing a special education program. And my son is a cameraman. I have 2 incredible granddaughters. Paula Sofia, whose birthday was September 23rd. She's 12 years old. And Elena Isabel, who's 7. And they both attended. We put the school, I call it the best Montessori school. First, it's a socialist school run by 2 sisters of my dear friends who are a lesbian couple.
Now, Dilcia, I'm afraid you're going to give away the full story and no one will read the book.
Okay. So, what can I tell you? I was arrested April 4th, 1980. I was released September 10th, 1999. I did time with Laura, Marilyn, Linda, of course, Bo, definitely, and Jane and Edie, and my darling friend there became an activist working for our release of campaign. We became a family, and that's what happened. And I was released September 10, 1999. 3 days ago, I became 76 years old, and I want to share a poem.
Fantastic. Share a poem, and then we hear from Linda next.
Good. All right. This is called 25 Years in Freedom. Freedom comes from our souls. It's a part of our existence, our essence, freedom. At times we suffer for freedom, and the end result is always beneficial, freedom. Once I arrived to Borinquen, Puerto Rico, I felt freedom immediately in my heart because our people received me from all walks of life with heartfelt embraces. Freedom. One thing I have realized is that I've always been free, even while incarcerated, under the worst of conditions. Freedom. Personal freedom comes from within. When one is clear about what one believes in, and I believe in the freedom of my homeland, Puerto Rico, freedom. People say that I have a way of being that strong and yet tender. I try to allow my heart to always guide me, freedom. I have walked the streets of San Juan, Guanica, Jauco, Jayuya, Juntas, Las Marias. I have seen every day the need for freedom, freedom. Puerto Rico appears to be free, yeah. Our people smile and they dance. Oh, they party and they share, yet our country is still not free. We remain a colony of the United States of America, never being able to have self-determination, freedom. In 25 years, I have witnessed many beautiful awakenings. The victory of Vieques, the outburst of support for Comandante Feriberto Rios after his assassination by the FBI. The streets were filled with children, elders, government workers, even the police saluted his funeral entourage. Freedom. At times passes, the victims are forgotten. Reality sets in, yeah. Nothing truly happens or has changed. Conditions of poverty, poor housing, miseducation, and corruption prevail. Definitely in these days in Puerto Rico, but repression is alive and well. We must continue forward, never losing our spirit to be free. I reside in Loíza, where the Cimarrones lived and the essence of our African roots are from. Young people here don't even know who Lolita Lebrón or Adolfina Villanueva are. They have no knowledge of the struggles their ancestors have endured. Freedom. Bomba and plenas are heard on the streets almost every weekend. Once a year, everyone hits the streets to celebrate, wow, La Fiesta de Loíza. Freedom. I wish we could celebrate the beauty of Mother Africa every day. I wish we could show our children the beauty of freedom every day in the schools, the streets, the library, and our plazas. Freedom. A freedom that encompasses why they are so beautiful and alive, why their bodies move to unknown rhythms, why their skin is in shades of luscious chocolate, why the vigilantes should be their heroes, why the vigilantes should be called love, and why every female should be known as a cacica. Freedom. Freedom is something that comes from one's soul. My soul tells me that our battle has not been won. We must make freedom a priority in our lives. Yes, freedom. Yes, freedom of spirit to change what surrounds us, the change that incorporates all of our being, body, mind, and soul. Without fears, freedom. Everything we need to accomplish in life has a consequences. We live, we love, we work, we care, we fight for what is real and just with unity and commitment. Freedom. Let us walk the freedom walk with heads held high, committed to humanity, self-determination, and self-love. Let us walk and fight for a free Puerto Rico, a free nation. Viva Puerto Rico libre. January 8th, the last Puerto Rican political president, Ana Belén Montes, will be in freedom. Free all political prisoners. You just mentioned Mutulu. I know that Mutulu, both our comrades, are near deathbed, and so is Leonard Peltier. And I think what we need to do is that energy that we had out of control, we can't forget. We have to make them heroes in everybody's day and night. Love you. Viva Puerto Rico Libre. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dilcia.
My pleasure.
We're now pinning Linda Evans, and Linda will join us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Linda Evans. I was a political prisoner for 16 and a half years, and I want to start by reading a poem written by Marilyn Buck for myself and a friend after I violated a prison rule against kissing during a visit. Kisses bloom on lips which have already spoken. Stolen, clandestine kisses. A prisoner kisses. She is defiant. She breaks the rules. She traffics in contraband women's kisses. A crime wave of kisses. Bittersweet sensuality, flouting women hating satraps in their prison fiefdoms, furious that love cannot be arrested. Now I'll just read a couple pieces from my the essay that I wrote for Sinister Wisdom. I first met my sisters from Out of Control when I was called down to the visiting room at the Washington, D.C. jail. By that time, I had already been locked up for 3 years, a whirlwind of trials and transfers. I had been on trial 4 times in 3 different states for political protest actions related to U.S. foreign policy, racial injustice, and human rights. I was already sentenced to 40 years in prison. Now I had another trial to face. I was indicted with 5 others in what we called the resistance conspiracy case. Out of Control supported all of us in that case, men and women alike. We were in the DC jail for over 2 years. The jail was so cold during the winter that ice formed on the inside of the walls. The food was often so disgusting that we managed to eat only because there was no alternative. Rats and cockroaches skittered through our cells at night. Our jailers kept me and my co-defendants separated in solitary confinement on different tiers, although this solitary confinement was often subverted by other prisoners, almost all Black, who smuggled us coffee and kindness. Visits from the outside world were few and far between. Out of Control members Jane Segal and Jay Mullins journeyed from California to DC to meet with us for the first time. When they entered the visiting room, I burst into a huge smile, so glad to finally meet them in person after sharing letters and phone calls. We couldn't hug or touch, and the time was way too short, but that was the beginning of deep friendships that still last to this day. After my transfer to FCI Dublin, Out of Control women continued to visit us. Here, our visits were more frequent and longer. We could visit outside in a small fenced yard. We could eat vending machine food. And hugs were allowed, as long as they were brief and only at the beginning or the end of a visit. These visits were a delight in the wasteland of our drab prison existence. Out of Control support was direct and enthusiastic. It was both personal and political. They connected us to the larger activist community and helped us relate to emerging political movements. They read our solidarity statements aloud at demonstrations, published our writings, and made our voices a part of the struggle of that time. For us as political prisoners, this connection was our lifeblood, and Out of Control was a beloved and invaluable connector. I am so deeply appreciate the love and hard work of all the women in Out of Control. Their support changed my life in prison, and I'm forever grateful. I just wanted to end by sharing this beautiful patch. I don't know if people can really see it. When I received my copy of Sinister Wisdom 126 in the mail, this really cool patch fell out. The patch was created by Sierra E., who works with Sinister Wisdom. On the patch are the words revolutionary optimism to remind us that our collective and revolutionary optimism will help us keep fighting for change. I was so happy to see this sentiment on the patch and to see that it had crossed through generations. Max, you want to show the quilt? I was also delighted because of another amazing coincidence, besides the fact that Sierra and I are both from Iowa. Many of you know that I became a quilter while I was in prison, and the first quilt I made was named Revolutionary Optimism, Windows on a New Day. I made that quilt for my beloved friend and comrade, Laura Whitehorn, who couldn't be with us today, but wanted to participate with the following pre-recorded message. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. As Max gets the video teed up, I will just note that Laura Whitehorn served a little more than 14 years in prison. Since her release, she has worked on campaigns to free political prisoners and to abolish prisons. With 2 formerly incarcerated elders, the late Mujahid Farid and the late Kathy Boudin, both deeply missed and mourned, and with the support of Sophia Elijah, she has created Release Aging People in Prison, the RAP campaign, and we'll put that URL in the chat for you to look at. And now, Max, if you would run Laura's message.
Grateful to all of you. My name is Laura. Hello, my name is Laura Whitehorn. I'm a former political prisoner, part of the resistance conspiracy case, and I'm so grateful to all of you who put out this issue of Sinister Wisdom, telling the history of Out of Control. And I am so deeply grateful to all of you who were out of control and remain out of control because of all the work that you did in the years that I was in prison and my comrades were in prison. You made it possible when we were first arrested, especially in the 80s, and I was an out lesbian in the prisons. Your existence and your support made it much more possible for me to keep my head up and resist getting really upset at all the attacks from the guards, many of which were physical, but many more were just psychological and just awful. And having you on the outside, standing up proudly, being lesbian, anti-imperialists and anti-racists, gave me strength and support. You supported our lesbianism, but even more, you supported our politics and having other anti-imperialists who were lesbians and changed the nature and the character of the anti-imperialist movement was incredibly important. Of course, your work to shut down the Lexington Control Unit was critically important. And, you know, a lot of our story together is wound up in friendship and support from you to us, and I hope from us to us who are inside to you. So even after the Lexington Control Unit was closed, I was in the Mariana Control Unit, and you supported us there. You supported me when I got out of prison, coming to New York and forcing me to buy pots and pans for my little apartment because I was clueless about, I had forgotten about how you cook and what you cook in. Jane, in particular, encouraged me to do art and jumped through hoops to try to get my art into shows on the outside, which felt so incredible to me when I was being vilified in the prisons and getting all the support outside. And of course, Bo, who welcomed my now spouse, then partner, Susie Day, and with Norma Jean, took Susie on many Dykely adventures in between her visits with me, which I love hearing about. And my dear, dear late Marilyn Kalman Moe, whom I wrote about in this edition of Sinister Wisdom, who gave everything she had to support us, who understood deep in her bones the nature and the importance of solidarity and how much it's based on love. So I hope people read this issue. This history would be lost if you don't tell it, if we don't tell it. It's really important for younger people to know. I now work in a group called Release Aging People in Prison. It's intergenerational. There are people like me who are pushing 80, and then there are people who are pushing 25, and they are thirsty for the history of what was built before the term intersectionality became popular. So thank you all. I'm so sorry I can't be part of this launch party in person. I love you. Free the land, free all political prisoners, and we will abolish prisons and imperialism together.
Thank you. I'm now pleased to welcome Zulma to share her experiences, Zulma Oliveras Vega, excuse me, to share her experiences with Out of Control. Zulma, it is all you.
Hello, everybody. I'm so excited and very honored to be here because I know that a lot of you took me under your wing when I moved to San Francisco, and I knew very little of what was going on with the movements, the civil rights movements over there. I also want to recognize that I am in Boriquen, in the Four Corners, from north, south, from Vieques to Mona Island. that this is occupied territory and that we're still giving the fight, and displacement continues, and people taking advantage of speculators coming here to buy land and then not helping the communities. We are not going to allow that. So just want to let you know that even that the hurricanes and the earthquakes have done a lot of damage and the government hasn't been doing their job, I have to praise for the communities that are doing their own job with their own hands and supporting each other, and also their own communities, including the queer, trans, indigenous, identify, Afro-Indigenous, and Two-Spirit communities. So I also want to emphasize on that because we are here and we exist, and we're going to do all that we can. And I'm just going to read a little bit of what I want to share with everybody, because I see a lot of names, the people that I work with and that I used to do a lot of great things, from seeing Linda over here that, you know, we used to visit you, and thanks to Penny, I was able to visit Marilyn Buck as well, and Adolfo, I used to take a 6-hour trip and sleep at the rest areas in order to go see him early in the morning. So that was part of the sacrifice that we sometimes have to make in order to collaborate and continue this struggle. So Out of Control changed my life into a path of activism that comes from love, generosity, and bravery. It was created to bring awareness about women political prisoners, led by courageous queer women from the Bay Area, while organizing anti-prison activism focused in our lesbian communities and organizing direct actions for the liberation of marginalized countries with anti-imperialist movements around the world. They taught me about anarchism, socialism, and that the civil rights movement is not dead. I say this because I grew up in the town of San Germán on the southwest part of the island of Puerto Rico. And when I finished high school in 1988, I felt so lost. I didn't know what to do with my life. So I came also from a working class, loving family. My parents are independentistas, and they taught me how to use my privilege to help others in need and who are marginalized. In the public school system that I attended, I was taught that after Martin Luther King's death, the civil rights movement was also disappeared, and that activism for human rights was lifeless, and that Puerto Rico's fate was to accept Uncle Sam as our savior for liberating us from Spain. In our school in the 80s, I don't remember receiving historical information about Spain and the US invading Puerto Rico, and they didn't give us a chance to develop our critical thinking to question authority at that time. Today, we don't have African or indigenous studies departments, and the census created false ethnography data by eliminating the categories for us Boricuas to identify as Black or indigenous people. I didn't even learn that we could organize in our high schools, like La FEPI, with groups similar to La FUPI that it was in the universities. I couldn't recognize those movements. Meanwhile, the system injected my generation with the 80s pop culture, keeping us naive about what it was really going on in our Latin American countries that were victims of many coups sponsored by the USA. So I kept on going, feeling lost, and I joined the Navy during my college years in Pennsylvania. So to find out the horrors that were happening in Vieques, our baby sister island, where the Navy was experimenting with napalm and uranium bombs. So I decided to go AWOL, the hell with it, and I crossed the fence with the promise to defend the human rights of my people in Boriquen. But it wasn't until I moved from Pittsburgh to the Bay Area in 1999, that I met Out of Control, the organizers of Sparks Fly. And I met through OC, the Dykes through the San Francisco Dyke March as well, where I spoke publicly about women political prisoners, about Vieques, and about Puerto Rico. And it was through this activism with Out of Control and Sparkfly that I learned that we have Native American prisoners, political prisoners like Leonard Puerto, and Black political prisoners like Mumia Abu-Jamal. I became aware of the history of the Young Lords, the Black Panthers, the Move 9, and Ramona Africa. And this really got me motivated to organize and to protest, express myself, and educate others about the hidden history of Boriquén, Puerto Rico. So connecting with indigenous communities from Chiapas and other parts of Central America, I was able to embrace my Afro-Indigenous soul without guilt or shame and be able to understand and embrace the colorism from my ancestry and advocate for land reparations. I remember also when Denise Alvarado introduced me to Bo Brown, a member of the Out of Control, who were here honoring, and Bo took me to meet Mo Kalman, who was celebrating her birthday up in Marin County, and the rest of the Out of Control members were there. So for me, that experience, it was really amazing to meet so many powerful women who knew about what was going on in Puerto Rico and Palestine, about Black movements, about political prisoners, and so many other important issues. And it was the first time I was surrounded by an influential group of women, like Out of Control, the collective of women, mostly lesbians, who are down to help the liberation struggles of other countries and marginalized communities. And in a parenthesis, hi, Tia Susan, I love you. I saw you around there. So thank you for always having me a place in your home with you and Mo for me to stay and my family. So I was able to visit Puerto Rican prisoner, like I mentioned earlier, Adolfo Matos at the Lompoc Federal Prison. And I began to write letters to all the Boricua prisoners. And then they became my teachers, my family, my extended family. Back on the island, no one talked about having prisoners of war in the USA, and I felt that it was my duty to speak about it around the world, about Puerto Rico, the prisoners of war, Vieques, and I was put my life at risk as well to create visibility of the colonial status that we still face. So today I still maintain a loving relationship with the ex-political prisoners back in Puerto Rico in order to create networks of support with the activists on the island. I was also blessed to find part of my extended family in Sparksfly and Out of Control and the San Francisco Dyke March. Because of their interest in justice, I was able to fundraise resources to travel to Palestine in 2004 with the International Solidarity Movement. My experiences with civil disobedience brought my purpose in life back to me, back to where it needs to be, to fight for our universal human rights or for our freedom by any means if necessary. Once I was able to accept that the civil rights movement is still alive and on fire, I continued collaborating with the Dykes involved with Sparksfly and San Francisco Dyke March. And I was feeling great and full knowing that the money raised by this group supported also the Women Political Prisoners Commissary Fund. I never really had anybody besides you, all of you, like not even Puerto Ricans that I know of did that. So I was really happy to see that you all did fundraising for our Political Prisoners Commissary Fund, and the fund gave women generous donations to help survive and alleviate certain needs while in prison. And I felt that Out of Control and Fireflies women really care about the justice inside the prison complex, and the sense of justice was very clear to them. People that I love dearly introduced me to Sparksflies and kept me under their wing, folks like Bo Brown, Denise Alvarado, Mo Kalman, and my dear Jane Segal. And speaking of Jane, I want to finish that some of the things that we used to do for the fundraisers, One time we dressed up as Frida Kahlo, she dressed up as Frida, and I dressed up as Che Guevara. And that was a lot of fun to do that kind of stuff at the fundraisers. And this is why not only fundraising, but these intersections of radical groups allow me and younger generations to follow their example and to create visibility, to fight for our rights, including queer, trans youth, indigenous people back in Puerto Rico. And once again, many thanks to you all, because all of you have been my mentor while I was there and while I'm still here.
Thank you, Zulma. That's so beautiful and such a lovely testament to the work. The last person that we are going to hear from is Jay Mullins. We're going to hear Jay Mullins' words voiced by Judy Sith. Jay Mullins was a founding member of Out of Control, and she was active with Out of Control for 25 years. And during those years, she visited prisoners, organized campaigns for women prisoners, and did solidarity work with women prisoners and Puerto Rican prisoners of war. Jay could not join us this evening or do a video, but Judy Sith, another member of Out of Control, is reading part of Jay's piece from Sinister Wisdom 126.
Out of Control was a group of lesbians in San Francisco who came together to shut down the Lexington Control Unit. It was the first high security unit built specially for women in the basement of the federal building in Lexington, Kentucky. For me, Out of Control was a place where I could be an out butch dyke and do political work and be surrounded by lesbians and other butch dykes like Bo Brown and Mo Kalman. Out of Control worked together with white progressive groups and national liberation organizations who had prisoners of war and political prisoners doing extremely lengthy prison sentences. But it felt like homophobia was tolerated, and being a butch was seen as more or less a white issue, and quote unquote, it wasn't the most important issue we're dealing with. It was comforting to have Out of Control, strong lesbian sisters that had our backs and supported us. We're talking about the 80s, right? It was Reagan, prison populations increased 90%, AIDS, queers could be ticketed for kissing. Being an out butch dyke, a lesbian, was unacceptable. Progressive movements were not immune to sexism and homophobia, and at that time, being queer and being visible was always seen as a white liberal San Francisco thing. This notion was difficult for us to deal with, being lesbians and being committed to fighting for freedom for all political prisoners. Straight people couldn't understand that we didn't want to be men, don't want to be men. We're women who love women. We're lesbians, we're butches, that's who we are. Bo had done prison time, a former political prisoner, but still overlooked and not given the respect she should have been given. It was hurtful. I'm just relieving those feelings. Showing up in Chicago with Bo, showing up in DC with Mo. Just the two of us walking into the room, and people would look at us like, what? It was unusual as visible butches to even be there in a space of internationalist leftist organizing. We were proud. We felt like this is who we are, and we're here to support the freedom of political prisoners, and we're here to do whatever we can do to that end. Over time, our working relationships got better because we struggled for change in a principled way. And we got respect from the progressive white and national liberation organizations in return. Out of Control was in it for the long haul. We showed what we were made of in terms of our activism and commitment. In the long run, we developed lasting friendships and mutual respect.
Thank you. As you've seen in the chat, I've been riveted by this whole thing and done something that we so rarely do at Sinister Wisdom, which is run over our 60 minutes. I have Brooke and Jane up now. This is what we're going to do. We're going to wrap up in the next 4 minutes here. Brooke and Jane are each going to say what they want people to do after reading this issue to do solidarity work today. Then we're going, so they're going to do that, and Max is going to, and we have some graphics of organizations that you can support that we will email out tomorrow. Then Linda's going to come on and read a poem. And then Max is going to put on just the last 90 seconds of the L word to take us out. When the song ends, the video call will end. So that's our order of operations here. Brooke and Jane, you each have 30 seconds for what you want people to do.
Okay.
Brooke, I'll have you go first.
Sure. I know that Jane has some material campaigns and to share. And I think that what I want to say is less specific than that, but that times have changed. Many things have gotten harder and have gotten worse in the last 40 years. We're in a time of so many crises, so many disasters, and so many catastrophes, and some are like the ones that we faced in the past, and some are new and really different. And I really hope that the community that's here tonight, just keep in mind, we need millions of people to join our social movements, and we need to empower young people to lead the way. I know that it's really hard to relate across the generations, and so my hope is just that we can stay in communication, support one another, and definitely share what we have to share with young people now.
Thank you, Brooke.
Over to Jane. Thank you.
Okay, well, what Linda and Brooke and I did was prepare a list. Linda Evans and Brooke and I prepared a list of different campaigns, different organizations that people can look to, and we were going to put it in the chat, but this is 30 seconds I have. Basically, I think people should pay attention to women lesbian newsletters that are promoting actions, petitions, campaigns, both about individual prisoners and also about the changing of laws like LWOP, life without parole, mandatory sentencing. There are active campaigns about violence that's going on inside of prisons here, both in Michigan and at FCI Dublin in California. And there's a list of organizations, and when you get it, please look at it, look at their sites, and take action. Thank you so much. There's the list. Black and Pink, California Coalition for Women Prisoners, has an amazing newsletter called The Fire Next Time. Am I right? National Bailout, National Council for Incarcerated Women, Survived and Punished has an amazing website that also includes many campaigns around women. Young Women's Freedom Center has things. All of these, we picked organizations where you can do something, not just donate money, but where there is some kind of action that you can take. And then there are some individual campaigns. Thank you so much, if Sierra put this together, thank you very much for taking my list and making it beautiful, taking our list and making it beautiful.
That's great. Thank you both so much. Now we'll hear Linda read a final poem. When Linda's done, we'll go right into our song.
I wanted to finish with a poem by Marilyn Buck. It's entitled 13 Springs, but Marilyn actually was in prison over 29 years. So I'm changing the title to 29 Springs. Had you planted a tree to fill in the deep well of my absence, that tree would be 29 springs high enough to relieve the relentless sun of incarceration, strong enough to bear the weight of children who might have been born, had I not been seized from your life and plunged into this acid-washed crypt of perpetual loss and high-wired vigilance. But there is no tree that stands in my place to harbor birds and changing winds. Perhaps someone will plant a willow, a eucalyptus, or even a redwood, any tree that will in 29 years more bear fruit and provide shelter.
Lover.